Welcome everyone to the York People's Assembly launch event. I'm Corinne Pearson, and along with some other wonderful people across the city, we've been working really hard to establish the People's Assembly here in York so that we're ready to unite and to fight for a fairer society for all. So there are a couple of things that I want to mention quickly before I zip it and we move on to our wonderful panelists this evening. So number one, if you haven't already, please do like and share our Facebook page, which is York People's Assembly. Number two, there are a number of ways that you can get in touch with us if you'd like to be part of the movement, and we're really hoping that after this evening that you will want to be part of that movement. So the first way that you can get in touch with us is by sending us a Facebook message to our page, which is York People's Assembly, or you can send us an email at yorkpaa@gmail.com. Number three, please do also register for our local activists meeting, which will be next Sunday at 6 p.m. And the link for that Zoom meeting will be posted in the chat facility. And number four, we've got time for question and answers from some of our panelists this evening. Any comments, any questions that you've got for any of our wonderful speakers tonight, please do post those in the chat facility too. And a couple of announcements from the People's Assembly nationally. On Thursday, we've got our regular webinar, which is called Jobs Under Threat, and that is on the People's Assembly page at 7 p.m. And the second thing is, on Friday, there is a People's Assembly Big Night In fundraiser, and that will be at 8 p.m. We've got a host of wonderful speakers, comedians, performers. It's going to be really fantastic. So we've got an absolutely, truly inspirational lineup of speakers tonight, one of whom's running a little bit late, but he will be here. So I'm going to be quiet and move on to our first speaker, who actually has to leave us at 7:20. So if you've got any questions or comments for our next speaker, then please do post those in the chat right now and as she's speaking. She's an absolute force of nature, and she is the People's Assembly National Secretary, Laura Pidcock.
Hi, thank you so much for that introduction. I definitely don't feel like one right now after 4 months, nearly 4 months of not leaving the house. And the reason I have to leave is for nothing glamorous, but me and my partner are on a tag team with our little boy because he's got a meeting, and we've got a toddler too. So thanks for being so understanding about the very kind of practical arrangements. I want to welcome everybody and echo what your wonderful chair for this evening has said, and welcome everyone in my position of National Secretary of the People's Assembly. I was so inspired years and years ago by the People's Assembly because, you know, when you're looking around and you can see all this negativity, you could see the immediate destruction that the coalition government were going to do, and you're like, where are my friends, where are my pals that also feel like this? And the People's Assembly from day one were making the case that austerity was a political choice, not a political necessity. And by austerity we mean taken as a political act millions, eventually billions of pounds away from our public services that our forefathers and sisters fought for, that taxation pays for quite often, and destroying that and changing the nature of what the state provides. Of course, we know why, for mass privatisation, changing expectations of what the public sector will provide. So they inspired me, and never has the People's Assembly been more necessary than now. Let's just think about what kind of government we have. So this is a really hard right government, one of the it's a, you know, certainly the most right-wing government I've ever lived through, and we have this government who have a renewed mandate in the middle of a very serious health pandemic. And let's just think for a second about the litany of failures. So the slowness to lock us down in the first place when they had repeated warnings, the ignoring of the findings of exercise sickness, a modelling operation about what would happen if a pandemic of this nature or a virus of this nature were to hit our country. They ignored that. This has been layered on top of austerity, so hundreds of thousands of vacancies in the NHS, the privatisation of many parts of it, the pay stagnation that people have been feeling in the public service for many, many years, and the cuts to so many services, as I mentioned before. Never mind the failure of PPE. Nobody will listen to me now, by the way, because Jeremy's turned up. Like, I'm just used to that, though. So I'll just carry on while he gets himself prepared. It's so nice to see Jeremy here, who too was one of the founding members of the People's Assembly and has been making the case against austerity throughout his whole time as a member of parliament. And so we find ourselves at this situation where we are living through this crisis, but we are also trying to provide a narrative about it and trying to think about what our campaign and demands are in this crisis. And that is very difficult. It's mentally wearing. I bet everybody on this call feels like tired, distressed at times. There are real emotional highs and lows. Got the Prime Minister today talking about reducing the health and safety requirements from 2 meters to 1 meter. We know that the impetus behind that is not putting people first. This is about the pressure that often big businesses provided, saying we need to get the economy back up and running. And actually, interestingly, I think there is a difference of opinion over this. Some elements of capitalism, if you like, probably do want a short, sharp lockdown to eradicate this virus as much as possible within our borders so that there can be a fuller opening, not this kind of half, reduced shifts, social distancing measures, because that is difficult. But for us and in the People's Assembly, what we are saying is that there is nothing more important than the health and safety of our sisters and brothers. That's number one. We don't compromise on that. That is at the heart of our response to this. Number two, that of course all of us on this in this meeting, and I'm sure everybody watching wants to get back to some sense of normality, but we do that when that is safe to do so. And number three, we are not returning to a system that has created the fragility that we see right now. So we are saying absolutely no to austerity 2.0. Mass redundancies are not an inevitability. They do not have to be like this. The government has choices at its fingertips, and it really will be about our pressure. So I know that people might be sat there right now, and let's be honest, worried about their mortgages, worried about their rent, worried about their income, worried about the safety of their loved ones, going out to work day after day. All of those things are normal. But what there is not is individual solutions to these problems. The only solutions that we have at our fingertips as working people, as people who are not wealthy, who do not own things, is collective solutions. And we are so, so powerful when we understand that collective power. And so this is my kind of play before I disappear to get my little boy asleep, is that, that can feel kind of quite paralyzing, that tiredness, that fear, that worry. But there are literally hundreds of thousands of people out there who want to join with you in solidarity to take action against this government, to demand a better future. And our pressure works. Look what happened. We societal pressure forced the government into a lockdown. We've been ahead of them all the time. Societal pressure delivered those free school meal vouchers over the summer holidays, and of course the wonderful campaigning of Marcus Rashford. Society has done this. People coming together collectively has done this. So let's take that confidence with us into a post coronavirus world where we say enough is enough. It's the nurses, it's the teachers, it's the food delivery workers, it's the people stacking shelves, it's the people cleaning up this virus that have seen us through this virus. And every Thursday when we clap those people, those incredible people, we were there in gratitude. And when we come out of this, we will also be there in solidarity with their demands, their industrial demands, on the picket lines next to them, on the streets for them. So thanks so much for having this meeting, for re-establishing this group, for giving all of those people in York a place to come to put their energy and to campaign against this government. Solidarity with you. It is so nice to see you, Jeremy Corbyn, and the other people on this call. I miss you, Jeremy. I missed seeing you in close quarters, but I'm sure you're going to inspire everyone on this meeting tonight too. Thanks so much, Corin.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you so much for being here, Laura. What wonderful words. You're absolutely right. You know, the power now is in our hands. You're absolutely right. Look at what we've done when we unite, we get behind each other, we stand shoulder to shoulder, and we say, no, we're not going to have that. You're absolutely bang on. The free school meals, the pressure to lock down. Absolutely. Laura, do you have time for a quick question, or do you have to go and do bedtime duties?
No, it's fine. He's causing havoc up there, but it's fine.
So mine are doing that as well. So we've got a question from Jennifer to you, Laura, and she says, what do you think about the relationship between school numbers increasing and the subsequent increase in COVID-19 cases in workplaces, particularly seems to be affecting parents and workers on a low income?
Well, this is for me the crux of the matter, and I think this is what I found so distressing. So, I used to be Shadow Secretary of State for Employment Rights and Protections, and at the core of that whole agenda was about creating uh, the conditions where power from those who are employers goes to those who are the workers. That there was a shift in that power because there was a recognition that power was skewed in favour of those who run companies rather than work for them or own them. And why is that important now? Because that exact example that you've just given. So somebody's exposure of the virus is very much dependent, unfortunately, on their relationship, their employment relationship, how secure they are, whether they are able to work from home. It's not many minimum wage jobs that you can do from your living room, is it? And the propensity of your employer to furlough you or to say, do you know what, just do what you can from home. If you're put on a statutory sick pay, there is, because you need to self isolate, there is a financial burden placed upon your family. And too often, the choice has been for people throughout this health crisis has been, do I stay at home and not be exposed to the virus and protect my loved ones, but face destitution, or do I go out into work and bring home money but have the exposure of the virus? What a disgrace that is. So I think there is a correlation. Let me just give a shout out to Autonomy, who are a research organisation who have actually done some research on this already, who have shown very early signs of that correlation. But the ONS have also said that if you are in the poorest areas of this country, you are more than twice as likely to die from coronavirus than the most wealthy. So this isn't my opinion, these are facts, and that's why security of employment is absolutely crucial. No to 0-hour contracts, no to precariousness, and yes to state provided safety and shielding from this virus.
Thanks, Laura. We've just gotten a comment through from Andrea Cowley in York, and she said, 4-day working week, please. And we've just got another question for you, Laura, if you've got time. This one is from Debbie, and she says, Laura, she'd like to ask you, what do you think about the opposition's support of this Tory government's approach that was announced today? She says she's absolutely devastated.
I mean, it is so hard, isn't it? And, you know, I am still a Labour member. I'm not leaving the Labour Party, and I know that the People's Assembly are not kind of sectarian, so they encompass all of the left quite rightly against austerity. We need that unity. I've said it before, Corin, but we are facing the most intense workers' rights crisis and health crisis in the last 100 years. And the opposition have to talk about it with the seriousness that it deserves. I don't support anything really that this government has done. And I'll tell you why. Of course, we were relieved to hear that furlough payments would exist. Yeah, we were relieved. Nobody would say that we weren't. But furlough payments will become a deferral of mass redundancies rather than a job retention scheme if there isn't a serious plan put in place to phase back those sectors that are at risk of collapse. So, like hospitality, totally dependent on demand, aviation, totally dependent on demand. There are some sectors that have done actually all right because people can still continue to purchase even from their homes and things like that. So the opposition, you know, I think that they're missing the strength of feeling against this government. I want to see from Keir Starmer the anger that there are working people who have actually never been allowed to protect themselves from this virus because they've had employers abuse the key worker status and all a litany of other failures. Never mind the inability of the government to procure PPE for its own people. No state intervention on manufacturing of our own protective equipment, out of date protective equipment for NHS workers. I want to see anger. I want to see a radicalness as we come out of this crisis because that's what it deserves. And I experienced that disappointment that your questioner also experienced.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you so much for being here tonight. I know how difficult it is to juggle everything, and everybody across the country feels that too. So
yeah, I think everyone's aged quite a few years in this process. Yeah. But thanks so much for your activism and setting this up. And we are. I know we're not with you, but we are with each other in spirit. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Laura. So unfortunately, our next speaker had to withdraw from this evening's event due to personal reasons. So we send Mal and his family our support and solidarity this evening. But fortunately for us, we have a wonderful stand-in, and will be Jason Rose, who is the chair of York Fighting Coronavirus Together, and he's going to talk about the local picture and what we've been experiencing over the last 12 weeks. Over to you, Jason.
Thank you, Corin. Yeah, kind of a big ask to step in last minute between two very famously popular and dynamic talkers and then talk about numbers, but here we go. I think the first thing to say is we lose understanding of the impact of numbers the more that we hear those numbers. So when we're talking about some of the information I'm saying, it's kind of important to try and remember that every individual is a specific case and everybody's impacted by one specific story. But I think even just the scale of it, we kind of forget about it. So, number one, we're the worst country in the world per capita for deaths from coronavirus. Just start out the bat with that particular statistic. It's not a good place to be. We may be better than we were. That's certainly the case. At our peak, we had over 1,000 deaths per day in this country. We now had 280 today reported. And the R value is 0.7 to 0.9. It was reported today. So, those numbers are going down at the moment or have been going down. But, over the last 3 months, we've been the worst in the world per person. We've had a total of 65,000 deaths to the end of May, says ONS, which is almost 70,000 now. We've had today the estimate is 33,000 active cases in the country today, and obviously that varies region to region. A lot of that regional data is missing, so you can't tell exactly where the R value is higher or lower all of the time. They are reporting it regionally, but not necessarily locally. Looking locally, we've had 156 people tragically die in York. 48% of those were in care homes. The average age was 82. So we have a very different picture locally than we've had nationally. The biggest challenge we have locally in responding to that and reducing that number going forward is the fact that a lot of the data is invisible. So Pillar 1 data is testing within hospitals. That number has been going down and down as fewer NHS staff have been getting the virus, and as fewer people are being tested inside hospitals once they've arrived, because most people have been tested beforehand. Pillar 2 data is starting to come out now. Again, it looks broadly positive in York, but we've had new cases every day since the 22nd of March in York. So every single day we've had new cases. We've also had test and trace so far, 21 tested, 65 traced. So that's in the time frame that a lot of the media have been reporting 0 cases per day in York. We've had 21 tested positively and 65 traced in that one system. So you know, that's some local context. We don't have any BAME data locally. We don't know anything about ethnicity of the people who have had cases or who've been hit hardest. My ward in the city only has 3.1% BAME community, but we do know that disproportionately, you know, members of the health community in York have been hit by coronavirus. So the impact of that, we're trying to work on that data as a city. That the council's putting a lot of effort in, public health are putting effort in on that. In terms of the next few months, the risks of impact of shops opening on the 4th, already open and continuing to open on the 4th of July, the impact of tourists over the summer, the impact of a lot of uni students, potentially 20,000 in September, is going to be a hard thing for us to manage as a city. There was a really good meeting yesterday, the City of York Outbreak Management Advisory Board. There's a whole 1 hour, 40-minute video online of them talking about all these in detail as a city, looking at the strategy. Economically, the reports have said in York that we could be looking at 18.9% unemployment in the wider York area. We in York have a real challenge. I think 16% of our city jobs are in retail, 15% are health and social care, 13% are tourism, 11% education, 8% transport, 8% manufacturing and construction, and those are just the ones that aren't work from home jobs. So that's the real challenge we've got. There are a lot of people becoming unemployed. There are a lot of people who are being, you know, who have to work in a situation where it's not necessarily perfectly safe to do so. You know, the council's working hard to try and make sure those people are protected as we reopen the city, but it's a big ask to make. York's done incredibly well. That 156 sounds like a large number of deaths, and it is. But we've only had 0.2 confirmed cases per 1,000 people in York. That's lower than Middlesbrough, Leeds, Bradford, Sheffield, Hull, Scarborough, East Riding. The only places in Yorkshire North East that the 2 lowest are Selby area and Moulton area, neighbouring to York. So, you know, we've done an incredible job of keeping those numbers low. But as we reopen, it's going to be increasingly difficult to keep those numbers low. On the other hand, our 18% unemployment stats compares to 10% nationally at latest estimates. But even before coronavirus hit us, York was very much a split city. We've had a situation where graduate-based tech jobs have been replacing rail manufacturing and other jobs for a long period of time. As a result, the worst York ward has 1.2% of people on income support or JSA, but the best ward has 0.0%. The worst ward in York has 20.2% child poverty. The best has 1.9%. Crime in the worst ward in the city is 20 times worse than in the best ward in the city. And life expectancy for men where I live is 10 years lower than the best ward in York. So that's the context of where we're at as a city before coronavirus, and some of the statistics around where we've been right now and how we've dealt with stuff so far. So I'll leave with a question. I think if we're talking about the importance of trying to save lives and the impact of all of these kind of aspects, my question for you all is really, when the worst off part of the city has been hit hardest by the virus and hardest by the unemployment and other consequences of the virus, and the best off has been able to work from home in comparative protection, how do we reduce that gap and then save lives for York over the coming years? Thank you, Karen.
Thanks, Jason. That was really comprehensive, and you're right, very full of stats. It was, but you're absolutely right. And with what you started off saying, each number is a person with a story, is a person who, with a family, is a person that had a life that was, you know, over too soon. And I think that's something that is often forgotten when we're talking about those numbers. Those numbers are people, and those people matter, and they didn't need to be a number. So I'm going to move on to speak with our third speaker. And when I was writing kind of what it was that I wanted to how I wanted to introduce this next speaker. It all kind of sounded a bit obsequious. So I'm just going to say, here's Jeremy Corbyn. Better late than never. You're on mute, Jeremy.
Right? Oh, good. Okay. Corinne, thank you very much. And thank you very much for inviting me to the York meeting this evening. I'm really, really pleased. I wish I was actually in York. It's a beautiful evening, but there we are. And I've just been sent a very nice present. Can I show you? The CWU sent me this, Communications Union, and it's CWU Against Racism, Show Racism the Red Card. And they're sponsoring that campaign. So well done, CWU, and thanks to them. I also owe York a big apology for the election street rally that never happened in December. If it makes it any better, but probably makes it worse. If I tell you it's the only street rally that went wrong in the whole of the campaign, it was York. And so I spoke to Rachel Maskell late that night, much later that night, and from a train somewhere, and she said, well, you're gonna have to come to York at least once. So I've been in touch with her and I've said, this is the down payment, and I will come to York physically when COVID is over, if that's okay with you, and we'll do some events then, because I felt really bad about that day, because we did a really good international launch and then all kinds of logistical problems kicked in, and then we went to Scarborough for a rally there later on in the day. So I'm really sorry, and I thank people for their forbearance in that. And I want to say thank you to the many campaigns in York, the Trades Council, the Labour Party, People's Assembly and others that have done so much to not just stand up for people against austerity and for decency in society, but also help to politicize a whole generation of people. And the discussion that's just going on now is really the kind of discussion that we need to have in every part of the country about the local economic structures, about the campaigns we've got to mount, and about what the future is going to be post-corona. But just take it back a second first. I'm obviously desperately sorry at the election result. Personally, I put absolutely everything I possibly could into that campaign. We did 100 events all over the country, and we went to every conceivable place. And the numbers of people that gave their all to try and win that election in atrocious conditions and weather was quite astonishing. In the end, we were stymied by an irresponsible, not very honest, very simple message from the Tories. We were putting forward a message of hope and investment and inclusion for the future. They were doing the very opposite. The sad thing is that I was being accused of being some kind of crazy spendthrift in November and December who would bankrupt the country by investing in education, health, homeless people, and protecting jobs, and making sure the railways were run for public benefit, not private profit, and so on. And guess what's happened? All of those things, because of the corona crisis, have actually come to pass. And so in that sense, it doesn't make anybody better off. There is, I believe, an obvious vindication of the policies we put forward in the eyes of a very large number of people around the country. The corona crisis started in January the 1st, I think, in Wuhan, in China. The World Health Organization notified there was a danger of an unknown novel virus very quickly to all governments around the world, as their duty back to do and did. They then said they then said that it looked like it could be an epidemic. They said that quite soon afterwards, and some restrictions were placed in Wuhan, and then the pandemic warning came. And what was the response of the British government? I was at meetings where they were talking about herd immunity. they were talking about the likelihood of a growing immunity to this virus once it had taken hold within the society. Unbelievably irresponsible, that approach. The idea being that you infect a large number of the population, some will succumb to it, some won't, and you'll have a stronger population at the end of it, because those that survive will be immune to corona-19. Well, that's the kind of philosophy that's used in breeding herd animals and farms. I mean, it's that sort of thing that was actually being thought about at the time. And I was saying to the Prime Minister and others, test, 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 as the only way of reliably knowing how many cases there are, and reliably being able to see how it affects people in different parts of the country, different age groups, different socioeconomic groups, and so on. And eventually we got to a situation where the government was always a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks behind everybody else in dealing with this. And we've had, therefore, more deaths per head than almost anybody else except the United States, where the president seems to take inspiration from Boris Johnson in the way that he handles this situation. And I do think the government's announcement today is too soon. It's not backed up by evidence. Indeed, the wishful thinking of the government that the corona crisis has gone away because it's gone on for a long time and therefore the death rate's falling. Yes, there are some places the death rate has come down. Yes, there are some places, my own local hospital, for example, has recorded no new cases now for, I think, 2 weeks. Good. Well done them. Well done the local community on that. But people still have it, and there are still deaths from it. And we still have over 40,000 deaths in this country, 400,000 at least across the world. So in other words, 10% of the world's deaths from corona have come from the UK. And so I think it is too soon to lift all the protections, and too soon to encourage the schools to be completely full again. And I think we should be very, very cautious of that. And also that when workplaces are reopening, then there has to be safety and risk assessments to make sure that there is proper distancing in place, that that distancing is appropriate. And Boris Johnson has now said 1 metre is sufficient. I've no idea where he got this figure from. He probably decided it was half of 2 is 1, therefore we'll have 1 metre. I think it's probably as scientific as that. And I hope are not going to face an increase in coronavirus 19 as a result of the way in which the government has behaved, particularly over the last 2 or 3 weeks. But I cannot be the only person that's very, very concerned about this. A couple of other thoughts, if I may. The corona crisis started in China, spread very rapidly to South Korea and to Italy, and then affected other places, including Britain, and obviously is now a global pandemic. Those places that took the most appropriate action against it have had the lowest number of cases. Those that chose not to take action or chose to try and undermine action that was being taken, like in Brazil and the USA, have had the highest number of death rates as a result of it. And I suspect that death rate is sadly probably even going to rise further. And tomorrow evening, I'm doing a Zoom conference with Dilma Rousseff, the former president of Brazil from the Workers' Party, tomorrow evening, in which we'll be discussing the way in which the corona crisis has been dealt with in Brazil, but also many other economic issues in Brazil. What is also underlined is the lack of healthcare that is freely available to people around the world. This country prides itself, and rightly so, on having universal free healthcare through our National Health Service, which is wonderful, and I would defend that to the end of my life. But we also had the problem of people with no recourse to public funds, those with no access to the NHS because of lack of permanent status and so on, or indeed those that worked in the NHS that would then have to pay for NHS treatment. And so I think that has just underlined that there was and still is a creeping erosion of the principle of healthcare free at the point of need for everybody in this country. If it's creeping here, it's galloping in other places. Millions in the United States have no access to universal healthcare at all. In many parts of the world, the economic model being suggested to them by the International Monetary Fund and by the World Bank is of insurance-based systems, is indeed the promotion of private medicine and private medicine services in those countries. And so I think that there is a lesson there, and we should be demanding of the World Health Organization that it is suitably empowered and funded to ensure that we do have universal access to free healthcare in all parts of the world. Those that don't have it have paid a terrible price. When you invest properly in healthcare, invest properly in prevention measures, you can improve health outcomes very, very quickly. Look at the way in which Ebola was dealt with in Sierra Leone and Liberia, and it has had a massive improvement there. But it does mean investment in healthcare. So then to show the government's determination in these matters, what do they do in the midst of the corona crisis? Announce they're closing down the Department of International Development and merging it with the Foreign Office. And I suspect what will follow then is a undermining of the funding of DFID, and once again a rededication of DFID's funds towards economic freedom, as they call it, in reality neoliberal economics and market economics sponsored by the British government. And that's why I was very proud of the foreign policy we put forward, of one based on peace, justice, human rights and democracy, and an overseas aid policy which was designed to bring about economic freedoms and justice to heavily indebted countries, and to support them in investing in health, education, housing, and green and sustainable industrial development. And so these things are very, very important that we campaign on. Now, when this crisis begins to pass and people go back to work, many have found or finding that once the furlough is lifted, they are not going to be required at work anymore, and the employer, having had the money from the government to furlough them for a while whilst the corona crisis at its most intense, are then going to get rid of that workforce, and that will obviously lead to a rise in unemployment. We're already seeing the start of a new tranche of austerity in Britain. Our local authorities are seriously underfunded at the very best of times. They've managed to get through this corona crisis by dint of incredibly hard work by working by a lot of local authority employees, but also a number of volunteers that have joined in to help get through this crisis. We've also got through because health and care workers have made superhuman efforts to get through. So I hope never again do we ever in this country have a Home Secretary who's going to describe cleaning as an unskilled job.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that, Jeremy. You're absolutely right. And so, we've got a comment here from Debbie, actually, who says, Jeremy Corbyn, always on the right side of history, always. And I don't think I could sum it up any better than that. But I do want to pick up on one thing, the theme of what you said, is just the utter contempt this government has for the people of this nation and those who are suffering so desperately here and across the globe at the hands of this crisis. So thank you so much for being here, Jeremy. I'm going to move us on quickly to Leigh.
Thank you, and my apologies for going on a little too long. I just wanted to give this message. We can defeat austerity, we can defeat injustice, but we have to be united together to do it. And that's why the anti-austerity movement, the People's Assembly movement, and all these organizations are so important that they come together. We come together on Zoom, we can come together in reality, but don't forget Zoom afterwards, because those that can't get to meetings can then join in.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I'm going to move us on to our final panellist, and this is our York TUC president, local activist and campaigner, Leigh Wilks.
Okay, thanks for that introduction, Corinne, and thanks, Jeremy, for that excellent speech. I thought it was very informative. So, I mean, first, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank Corinne and the People's Assembly for inviting me to speak. The TUC has quite a long history of working with the People's Assembly on all kinds of different issues over the years. So it's great to be asked to participate in a kind of refounding meeting of the group. Just a few years ago, the People's Assembly in York is one of the most influential activist groups in the city. So it really would be great to see the centre of campaigning in the city again. Now, obviously, the COVID-19 crisis has been the defining feature of this year. It has affected absolutely everything and everyone. Regardless of whether you know someone who's been affected by the disease, this year has seen huge social changes that we can only really begin to touch on. We can't really begin to touch on in the time that we've got here. I'm pretty sure that like a graduate sociologist could write a long dissertation on some of the social changes that coronavirus is causing throughout society. One thing that it certainly has done is that it's knocked Brexit off the political map, which I think is something that a lot of us will be thankful for. I don't want to speak on that issue particularly, but in my opinion, that is why we lost the election.
Leigh, I'm just going to interject quickly. I'm really sorry, but will you move your microphone a little bit closer to your mouth, just so that we can hear you a little bit clearer? Try it now.
Okay. So within the trade union movement, trade unions and union branches have tended to move in two different directions. So firstly, we've had branches and groups that have simply ceased to meet and therefore kind of ceased to function. Because at the beginning of the lockdown, nobody was at all sure how long it was going to last. And so nobody really had any kind of contingency plans in place. So that's the case from kind of city branches at the ground level right up to the national executive committees. The other direction, which is the one that we decided to take in York TUC, was to continue to meet and on a weekly basis, because a lot of us recognised that this virus was going to have a huge effect on workers' rights, which have already been under attack, of course, for a decade, as we all know, on vulnerable groups in the community and also, of course, on the economy. And on all those things, there have been huge changes and challenges which we're only starting to see the beginning of. So one thing that we've recognised, which has been borne out by events, was that different companies have taken a different approach to the lockdown. So we knew that some companies would take this crisis as an opportunity to shave off excess staff and cut the terms and conditions of staff remaining in the company. And one of the most shameful examples of this has been British Airways, who made staff redundant and then offered to take them on again under much reduced terms and conditions. So of course, COVID-19 has had a devastating impact on the country's economy. I would compare it to the crash of 2008, but it actually dwarfs the crisis of 2008 by quite a big margin. The economy is forecast to shrink by about 20%, which is a huge loss to our productivity as a country and to the financial situation of workers. So what we are looking at really for a comparison is the situation in 1928, which led to the Great Depression of the 30s. And we all know that in that kind of environment, the far right often takes up the slack left by the mainstream political parties. We've seen this happening in the US, as we know. It's happening right across Europe. In Britain, the far right has never done particularly well politically, but in this situation, absolutely anything is possible. And we really should be on our guard for the rise of the neo-fascist movement in Britain. And all of us, of course, can see this just by looking at our Facebook timelines. I've lost count of the number of times I've seen, but white lives matter, but all lives matter in response to the Black Lives Matter protests. Now, the people who post these kind of sentiments are not fascists, but they fundamentally misunderstand what Black Lives Matter is all about. And secondly, they are politically naive and right for a far-right party to come along and to express these kind of sentiments at a national level. Some of you might have seen the front page articles that the York TUC had in the local press about the lockdown. encouraging people to report companies who are behaving in a manner which is unbecoming of a responsible employer. And in the weeks following those articles, we were kind of snowed under by people reporting bullying, cuts in wages, companies who were clearly not adhering to the social distancing guidelines, and seeing the lockdown as an opportunity to attack workers rather than to stop the spread of the disease. And as a result, some of these companies fell into line when they knew that we'd become involved, while others we've had to report to the Health and Safety Executive and other bodies. Now, I don't want to name and shame anyone because I'm going to be submitting a press release at the end of this week on exactly this issue. But what I have been surprised by is the number of complaints about York City Council as an employer. And this relates to care homes and the lack of protection for people in those care homes, along with the risk of infection by subcontracted care workers who are spending time in the community and then at the end of the shift going into care homes and potentially infecting people within those homes. So what we are seeing in care homes like across the country is a crisis of unprecedented proportions. And this is really behind what the recent rise in the R infection rate, as Jason touched on earlier. I mean, just to kind of conclude, the problem with York is that it's in a uniquely difficult position. It's one of the most expensive cities to live in the country, and yet the tourism and service sectors account for a huge chunk of our local economy. So it's kind of a perfect storm in the economic sense. And York is going to take a big hit in the coming months. So we need a local activist group like the People's Assembly to take up those challenges and make a difference in the local community. I just want to take the opportunity to praise Unite's community branch, which has been doing this kind of work in the community. This is the kind of thing that I'd like to see the People's Assembly involved in. What we are doing at the moment, if anyone on the call is interested, is we're organising some training from regional TUC on unionising precarious workers, because precarious workers make a huge portion of our economy now, and they're going to be hardest hit by the economic changes that the coronavirus is causing. And finally, the other important issue, of course, is the anniversary of the founding of the NHS, which is coming up in the next few months. Obviously, the NHS, which is the best example of British socialism, which has played a unique role in the country's response to the crisis, is worth celebrating, and the NHS is proof that socialism does work. So this hasn't been released publicly yet, but on the 3rd of July, at 2 p.m, we're going to be holding a demo in the grounds of Goodham Park Hospital. So I'd really encourage all of you to come along to that and express your thanks to the NHS for 70 years of service to the community. Because right now, Kaiser Permanente and the other US pharmaceutical groups are still looking at the NHS for pickings, and this is something we really need to oppose at a local and national level. So,
thank you.
Yeah, 1 minute. There's lots of challenges in the next few minutes.
I think you've got about 15 seconds, Leigh.
Okay. I really hope the People's Assembly will rise to these challenges and get involved in local campaigning. And you can be sure that your TUC will support you all of the way and help you in tackling these challenges. So thanks for the opportunity to speak. Good luck.
Oh, thank you very much, and it's wonderful to hear that we have the support of the TUC as well, because we're going to need all the backing we can get to fight what is probably going to be something really horrible around the corner. But I am going to really swiftly move on because we've got about 9 minutes for some questions. I do want to just point out that also Tim on the chat has said there's been more sense being taught here with you guys than there has been in the last 3 months of lockdown with the government, and he wants to say keep fighting. And I think that is a sentiment that is really important, that we have to keep fighting, and it's a fight that's worth having. So I've got a question here for Jeremy. I'm trying to find the question now. So this is a question from Hannah in York, and she says, what are your thoughts and views on the government's decision to stop the daily briefings? That's for you, Jeremy.
I think it's a great mistake. The briefings should happen every day, and the government should be put under some pressure every day at those briefings. The briefings themselves are almost a parody of communication, where you have a minister stood there staccato-like in front of a flag with wood paneling around them. It's usually a he, who then talks and then answers a few selected questions from one or two people and then moves on. But I do think they should be made to do a briefing every single day so that we can be aware of the totality of the numbers. And if we hadn't forced them into doing the briefings, I think we would not have managed to get the pressure we did on the lack of supply of PPE equipment, for example. And that is still not a done deal by any means. And I think at the beginning, a very important point was made, and that was that the manufacture of PPE equipment could and should have been an opportunity to give work to a lot of people who were very happy and willing to make it. And there were no end of places all around the country where local companies and people came together and said, we can make gowns, we can make masks, we can make all these things and do them very quickly. And indeed, a very enterprising local printer in my community did 3D printing to make masks on his print system and his computer system. It can be done. Could he get an order from the government? No way. They're more interested in getting it from their mates and bringing in Serco and Amazon to do the delivery of all this stuff. And so what we've seen is a creeping privatization of government services during this whole process.
Thank you, Jeremy. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that I picked up definitely during the general election with you and through your speech here. Yeah, absolutely. When things go wrong, we have to pull together, and the idea of hope is really important, and that is what people did in their hundreds of thousands. They came together to hope to make it better by, you know, ventures such as the 3D printing, but the government have hugely failed us at every single turn of this crisis, and they continue to do so. We've got another question. I'm going to put this one to you, actually, Leigh, if that's okay. So this one is from Alison, and she says, how do we highlight how workers with disabled children have been totally forgotten during lockdown, almost abandoned really, and left to cope without services, school and extra help?
It's an excellent question, and I think it's something that's really been ignored really by the media. Obviously, people who have got children who are working from home, when the schools closed, not everybody could work from home. A lot of people, you know, on minimum wage contracts, on 0 hours contracts. That does not take into account the cost of childcare and so on. So it's been a kind of perfect storm in the sense that the lowest paid workers are paying the highest price. Obviously, I mean, in my opinion, the government should be helping to subsidise the financial situation of these workers. And I think that would be happening if the Labour government was in office. But all we can really do, and it's something that I will be highlighting in the press release at the end of this week, you know, I shout as loud as we can about this, because at the end of the day, it is kind of the lowest 30 to 40% of workers who really generate the economy. And once their spending situation goes down, it causes actual real damage to the economy. So I think that's the angle we should be coming from, the economic angle, because it's one that people understand. 20% is a huge drop in the economy, and part of that is because of the situation of vulnerable and low-paid workers with children.
Okay, thank you, Leigh. Yeah, the idea of shouting loud is important. Look at the U-turns that we've forced the government to make already, that Laura talked about earlier. Another question for you, Jeremy, here, and this is from Susan Turner in York. She said, how can we ensure that climate change, which is already seriously affecting the Earth, is being taken seriously when we come out of this crisis? Aviation must be cut down and not bailed out.
Thanks, Susan. I did say a little bit in my talk earlier about the green industrial revolution and all that goes with that. And I believe very, very passionately in that one has to not threaten people with environmental measures, but ask them to embrace environmental improvements as an opportunity to improve their own lives. So we take people with us rather than be seen as environmentalists who are some or other separate from the rest of society and the rest of community struggles. One of the side effects of corona has been this, that corona is vile, it's horrible, it's taken lives, and friends of mine have suffered from it and so on. I share their pain. There has been another side to it, though. Somebody said to me, a young person said to me the other day, that they found interesting about corona was that life seemed slightly more reflective, and that they valued things they didn't know they valued before. They suddenly realized how much they valued cleaner air, they valued clearer skies, and they valued the environmental improvements that have actually happened because of the corona crisis. And so the response to government is straight away to bail out the airlines and to talk about getting more cars back on the road and all that. Whereas surely the response ought to be that we've shown that it is possible to live cleaner lives, and this should be a spur towards COP26, which will be held next year, I suppose it's going to be, will be the next climate change summit. We cannot get anywhere near net zero by 2030 if we carry on as we are. We won't get to net zero until the end of the century, if not after that, for the UK at this rate. And so I think it has to be a spur towards all of that. And what I've found is the number of young people that have been in touch with me, sending me their stuff, letters, thoughts, poems, emails, lots of things, all of which relate to the need to improve our environment and our biodiversity. And in York, the incredible work done by people, yes, to deal with the issues of flooding in York, which are dangerous and very, very serious, but also the upstream systems that have been developed of alluvial floodplains and all that, which means that you can actually control river flow in a much more sustainable way, is all very good stuff. So I hope what comes out of this is a renewed unity on issues of environmental sustainability. And we don't just go back to saying, hey ho, that was 3 months off, and now we start go back to pollution again. Because the last thing I'll say on this is that look at their map of health inequality in Britain. Look at the life expectancy of the poorest people in the poorest places. Look at the life expectancy of those that work in dirty industries, those that work in dangerous places compared to the others. Let's measure the others as a basis on which we want everybody to be able to lead longer, stronger, happier and healthier lives. It's not a pipe dream. It's not utopia. It's just plain common sense.
Thank you. And we've already seen the effects, the positive effects of fewer cars on the roads here in York. We've had a huge improvement in cleaner air in some of the most polluted parts of the city, and I know that some of the councillors across the city are really striving to ensure that that is something positive that we take forward from this, and you know, out of the bad comes the good.
Indeed.
So I am going to start wrapping up there. I just want to take this time to say a huge heartfelt thank you to everyone here, and Laura. Jason, thank you so much for stepping in at the last minute. Thank you all for your contributions, and I'm hoping that everyone watching has been inspired by everything that you've had to say, and that we can come together and fight for a fairer society for everybody. Over the last 12 weeks, we as a city have united to help our most vulnerable. And what we need to do now is to harness that unity. We need to build on it, and we need to drive the Tories out so that we never again have 5 million children living in poverty, so that we never again have NHS nurses using food banks, and we never again have hundreds of thousands of people experiencing homelessness. We have to stand together and say, no, we're not going to put up with that. And so I'm really hoping that you will join us in the fight for that. And our next activist meeting, our local activist meeting, will be on Sunday at 6 p.m. and the link for that Zoom has been put in the chat, and I'll also post it on the York People's Assembly page. So thank you everyone for watching, for participating, and thank you to our